studios of Penn State Public Broadcasting, tonight's program is part of WPSU's Common Ground Lobby Talk series. Here's host Patty Satalia.
Much of the uranium used to fuel the Cold War and America's entry into the nuclear age came from the Four Corners area of the Colorado Plateau, otherwise known as the Navajo Nation. Tonight, we'll talk about how uranium mining began on Indian lands and about how its deadly legacy still lingers. Good evening, I'm Patty Satalia. Welcome to WPSU's Common Ground Lobby Talk, a conversation with Sonya French-Begay. French-Begay is the Workforce Investment Act Program Director of the Council of Three Rivers American Indian Center, located in Pittsburgh. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good evening.
I want to begin with kind of a geography and history lesson. The Navajo Nation was created in 1868, and it's the largest Native American reservation in North America. Explain where it is and how it came to be a semi-autonomous Native American homeland.
Well, initially the Navajo Nation is located within 3 states. We have Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And we have one of our smallest reservations, which is Rama Navajo, which is located in New Mexico. One of the things that's very interesting about the Navajo Nation is that we are a sovereign nation, a nation within a nation. We have our own political structure. We have our own judges. We have everything that we need to actually get an atomic nation, basically. Initially, what happens historically, that we were placed on reservations for a long period of time. Then they took away our rights and sent us through something called the longest walk, which is in Bosque Redondo, New Mexico, taking hundreds of people or thousands of people and making them walk from wherever they were located in Arizona to New Mexico.
We're talking 300 miles,
right,
and lots of people died.
Right. And about 1865, we finally got basically the privilege to go back to our homelands. And within this problem, we foresee that the boundaries that they have established for us privately is basically shrunken. We have smaller lands. We have most of our vegetation has been burnt down. Our livestock has been shot. So initially, at this point, we have to figure out what we have to do as Navajo people or Diné to restructure ourselves.
Now you said Diné, and most people would say Native Americans. You would be referred to as Navajos. You use Diné, which means the people. What's the proper term to use?
Well, initially, I could consider myself Diné. It's translated from our language to the people. The Spaniards called us Navajos, which means thieves. So, of course, this is a very negative connotation to us as people because we weren't thieves. We were basically trying to get our horses and our livestock and such back.
So, Diné, the people, or First Americans, is that another
yes.
term that would be considered acceptable?
Right.
According to the U.S. Census, there are 300,000 Navajo or Diné. How many live on the reservation?
We would say within that approximation, I would literally think about maybe about 25 to 35% of our people live there. We are, as far as tribal enrolled members, we have a lot of people who still are on the reservation itself, but a lot have migrated because of economical problems as far as jobs and looking for better schools. And now, of course, we ventured off into other states and to make better lives for ourselves and our families.
It's interesting because in preparation for this program, I watched a number of programs, 30 Days with Morgan Spurlock. He spent 30 days in a Navajo reservation experiencing what reservation life is like. And of course, a PBS program, We Shall Remain, which gives us some history of all of this. And there was a scene in 30 Days of a young man who was raised on the reservation and who talked about this feeling of straddling two worlds. And I'd like to get your own personal perspective because you were born on the Navajo reservation but traveled with your father when your father moved because he worked in the Air Force. Tell us a little bit about your own childhood and your connection to this day to the Navajo Nation.
Well, one of the corrections I might add is that I was raised in Los Angeles, but my father and my mother were both taken off the reservation about when they were like 8 or 9 years old and taken to Sherman Institute, which is located in Riverside, California. From that point, my grandparents were told that this would be a better life for them, especially if they're from larger families. And unfortunately, when they didn't tell them that basically we're going to take them and strip them of who they really were. So my father's recollection is basically something, he always looks at Schindler's List. When they're going there and they get doused with lice powder, they get their hair cut off, everything is taken off of them. And these are children from 8 to 9 years old. And so this is what he had encountered when he was a small child. So with this particular connotation in his mind, that if any children that he would have, and he told me this, is that he did not want us to go through something like that, strip of your language, your culture, everything was taken away from you. So that's how we were raised. We were raised in Los Angeles. But maybe during our spring breaks or something of that nature, he would take us back to the reservation. And usually it's during lambing season, which is in April, where we'd help birthing lambs and things of that nature. But the problem is that when we went back home, and that's what I consider my home, we had people who just thought we were different. We didn't speak the language. We looked different. They even said we smelt different. So obviously they treated us much worse than they would anyone else who was an outsider. But we would continue going back. And after a prolonged period of time, I figured it's about time I go back to college. And I went to Navajo Community College at the time, which has been recently changed to Dene College. And so I learned my culture, history, and a lot of other things that were implemented to me as a person. So I could take that on and pass it on to my grandchildren.
You mentioned language, and the Navajo language is said to be one of the most difficult languages to learn. Many people may know about the Navajo language because of the Navajo code talkers during World War II and the role they played in winning World War II, because they helped the Navajo Marines devised a code that couldn't be broken by the Japanese. But in 1979, 80% of those living on the Navajo reservation spoke Navajo. 10 years later, only 10%. So I'm wondering what the statistic is today and how concerned you are about the loss of that language.
I'm very concerned. Myself, we were not taught the language. I actually can understand it. One of the problems that we have encountered is basically they're telling us in 2020, if they continue the way they are now, we will lose our language. This is mainly the written word, and also the spoken word. A lot of our elders are very concerned because a lot of the things that we have as far as ceremonies are concerned are being lost. And so of
without
course,
the language, ceremony doesn't really exist.
Right. So we still have ceremonies we continue on in the fall, like the Yebiche ceremonies, or we have nightway ceremonies. We have different ceremonies we do during certain times. But unfortunately, since we have the children or the adults or whoever's still on the reservation do not learn the language, they cannot participate in these ceremonies any longer. So we're losing that too.
Now, you've committed your life to work for Native tribes and environmental issues. Explain how you became involved in all of that.
Well, I think what happened was when I used to go back home to Tuba City, it's where my father's family is from, you would see a lot of things going on as far as the environmental problems, as far as water contaminants, air contaminants, and then you would see the physical things. All of a sudden we see kidney dialysis centers coming up out of nowhere, and I would question that. So what's going on? Well, so-and-so's got cancer and is losing, and the biggest problem is diabetes. But then when you see cancers coming up in places that shouldn't be, as far as like thyroid, lymphoma, breast, I mean, it's like a whole conglomerate of different things going on. You see a lot of the elders getting these things all of a sudden. So I thought, well, what's going on? So we're looking at water. They're still sustainable on the land. They're eating the livestock, obviously. They're watering their plants. But then you look at where they're watering is from contaminated wells.
Water is a major, major issue on the Navajo reservation. Explain what's happening for Native Americans who are living on the reservation in terms of water.
The major issues is just basically no water. You only get it from the rain. And obviously with with our problems with the weathers and things of that nature, it's not coming.
And so there are 80,000 Navajo residents who are literally going to a spigot, driving miles and miles to get water, take it back home, And you mentioned that it's contaminated with tailings, which of course brings us to the uranium.
Right.
Uranium was first discovered on the Navajo Reservation in 1941. A year later, the Manhattan Project, the secret Manhattan Project to create an atomic bomb was underway in earnest by 1942. Tell us a little bit about the uranium, the abundant uranium deposits on Navajo land.
Well, in lieu in the 40s, they were looking for the source to obviously get the atomic bomb. You have 4 sources, which is basically one is in the New Mexico, and then also you have 2 or 3 of them in Utah, and also in Arizona.
And so mining companies came in droves. It was, I would guess, comparable to the gold rush in terms of companies coming to this area to mine for uranium ore. Lots of jobs were offered to Navajo residents, and they took them. What was their understanding about what they were mining and what, if any, dangers exist in this work?
Unfortunately, with all the technology or the actual know-how, especially during the Manhattan Project, they knew the dangers of what would happen with the uranium. They knew the dangers of radiation, but they didn't tell the Native American workers or even indigenous people from Mexico who were coming up too for this. And so they were just like dying like flies for no reason.
So how soon after they began working in mines did the health impacts start to surface?
The health issues were going on for quite a while, but they just didn't really determine what the prognosis was. In 1985, they figured, okay, something is really going on, so we're going to have to look into this. And that's when the RICO Act came through, is mainly to set there, we need to compensate these millwrights, mill workers. We need to compensate the people who are dying. But unfortunately, some of the ones, when it finally came across, that they were not able to say, we'll give it to this family, because it's like, oh, well, the person has already passed away, so you will not get the money from that.
You mentioned the RICO Act, passed in 1990. Explain what the RICO Act is. What does that stand for?
Well, anyway, initially what it is the Radiation Compensation Act. And if you're exposed to radiation through mining and such, that you will be compensated a certain amount. And the Navajo people were looked at $125,000. One of my uncles was actually one of the workers who was on this particular facility. What he had to tell them was basically go through more or less a physical to specify he doesn't smoke, he doesn't do this. There was a whole number of things going on. But he got the $125,000, but there's some other people who worked with him as far as neighbors were concerned who could not get it because they smoked for like 10 to 15 years.
And smoking was not their problem, most likely.
So you're basically dealing with ailments as far as lung cancer is concerned and other things that were of course, with the uranium contaminants.
Even more critical than the lack of compensation, it seems to me, is the fact that the situation, although mining ceased, I think probably sometime in the 1980s, the contaminants persist. In 1979, 39 million gallons of radioactive water went 50 miles downstream into the Puerco River. It was the largest release of radioactive material in American history. And my guess is, I have to say, that's the first yesterday's the first I'd ever even heard of it. And my guess is the same can be said for our audience here.
And I think what's very important is that particular mainstream of water goes into the Colorado River. And where does the Colorado River goes? It goes into the metropolitan areas of Las Vegas and obviously into California and Los Angeles. So you're dealing with a lot of this contaminants staying into the sediments of the Colorado or the sediments along the sides, and you don't really see that. Nobody really tells anybody that your water has been contaminated with radon.
Although many people living on the reservation thought there was this harmless yellow dust on top of the water, they would scoop it away and drink from it, feed their cattle and their sheep.
And you would see children playing in this. And the sad thing is that you have people who are still sustainable to the land, would actually take I remember long ago we would take buckets or big barrels of water from these places. And my grandmother used to tell us there's this yellow stuff on the top. And my father, he was a design engineer from Caltech, told her, don't use that water no more. It's something that's not good for you. We had to get rid of the barrels. We had to get rid of everything that had that yellow cake. And that's what they call it, the yellow cake.
the yellow cake uranium ore. Okay, we have a question from the audience we'd like to go to. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just wanted to say what a pleasure it is to know you at this moment, and that we offer you our solidarity in all your different efforts, and apologize for the sake of at least my representation of this land for all that has transpired to your people. Now, I have lived in Europe. I lived in actually several countries around the world. And when I want to know what's happening with the American Indians, I have to look in Canadian sites and European and Australians, because there is very little publicized here. I mean, I hate to say this, but do you have public relations people that can help you in this respect?
We have a very important group. It's in Washington, D.C., which is the National Congress of American Indian. And they do have a very, very good person there who does all the advocacy for us. And he's more or less the liaison with our government. But unfortunately, when you have such a vast variety of tribes, vast variety of nations who are not looked at, we're not looked at as saying, okay, there's a problem here with our water. But the problem being, I think, is initially we just don't have the money, we don't have the I guess the staffing, or the information for people to come and say, hey, we have a problem here.
PBS just produced a 5-part series, We Shall Remain. There was another PBS program, The Return of Navajo Boy. Morgan Spurlock, who I mentioned a moment ago, did 30 days, similar to the film he did, Supersize Me, about the fast food industry. And I'm wondering just how important those kinds of measures are.
I think they're very important. Initially, it gives everyone an idea that yes, as Native American people, we have our problems. We have issues that we still have to go against, especially environmental issues. We have socioeconomical issues, obviously. Instead of having the stigma of saying that we still have, we're obviously on the poverty line way low, and also we have, everybody says we're drunks and things of that nature. It gives them an idea that we still have our identity. As Dene people, we still have our identity. People who are in the Lakota have still their identity. But you have to understand too is that we're more so trying to be more progressive. Awareness needs to be placed out there much more. So I'm really grateful that we do have films that come up like Navajo Boy in 30 days.
Okay. Another question?
Yes, please. I just wanted to clarify one point. Now, the American government went into Navajo land and mined the uranium from a designated Navajo land and did not share the profits.
There were supposedly royalties and discovery bonuses and all kinds of things that I think a lot of people are waiting for, just as they are for compensation for their illnesses and for family members' deaths.
Right. And what their agreement was at one point is that it was, the last time I heard it was like a very minimal point is 1.2%. So anything that Peabody Coal Mine, which is the ones who went in there to mine the uranium, they got all the royalties from that, and we got 1.2% off of that. So if you can figure out how much that would be, it's obviously not much at all. But we put our workers out there, we put our people out there to work, to sustain life and to bring in for their families. But unfortunately now, 30, 40 years later, we're reaping the health problems.
Many of these companies that pulled up stakes and left in the 80s want to come back.
Right.
These are some of the same companies that have done strip mining in West Virginia and places like that, but they want to come back to Navajo land because there is renewed worldwide interest in nuclear power. Tell us a little bit about the Navajo Nation's reaction to these companies coming back.
They don't want them coming back. First of all, you didn't clean up what you brought. You leave things open. I mean, when we talk about uranium mill tailings, there are piles of radioactive material waste that's laying there, and all of a sudden you have kids playing football on top of them.
And we're talking about a windy environment.
Right, we're talking about windy is like 50 to 55 miles an hour, and you're telling it just sort of twirling a wind. You have a lot of vegetation that just soaks up anything that's got some type of moisture. So and our animals still eat that. And we butcher our animals, like sheep and cattle, so we'll butcher them and we eat it. You still have, like in Hopi, in the Monocopi area, they still water off of the rivers that go through there, or the wash that goes through there. It's dirty water, that's all it is.
The promise is that there's new technology and that the contamination that occurred the first time won't happen a second time.
Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. I think when my husband had made the comment, it was that it's just like covering a sandbox. That's all basically it is. You have the tailings, you cover it up with some kind of thing, but it's already seeped through and made the damage into your water. So how do you treat your water? One of the things that one of the filtration systems that came through in Tuba City basically told us that you will have pristine water after we get this particular filtration system in. We haven't seen the pristine water at this time.
In Tuba City, some of this radiation is posted as areas where people shouldn't go.
Right.
But it doesn't sound like it's a very adequate warning.
No.
It sounds, and from the pictures that I saw, the signs are small, the fences aren't complete.
Well, and also too, you're dealing with people who are still sustainable to the land. They can't speak English. They don't read English. You have to have people go to their homes and say, you cannot water off of that particular well that's over there.
But is there an alternative?
We hope there would be an alternative at this time, but unfortunately there's not. It seems like that we just went back just recently, and you still see the wells that I know are contaminated do not have the signs on there to specify that they do not use this water because it's contaminated.
We have another question from the audience. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to preface this question with the common knowledge that over 6 million visitors come to the Four Corners area every year on vacation, with Interstate 40 being the most traveled land transport cargo route for the United States. Would you say, with that being common knowledge, that this is just an isolated Navajo problem, or with the 100-mile-an-hour winds that have blown that contaminated sand and the water around for at least the past 40 to 50 years, would this be something that you would consider every American's problem?
I consider it's everybody's problem at this point. It's gone far for, it's a boundary that's so invisible at this point that we cannot determine it's a Navajo's problem, Hopi problem, Pueblo problem. It's gone further than that.
The irony of all of this is the fact that American tourists are going to these areas and realization that there is this contamination and exposure may in the end be what gets you the help in the Navajo Reservation that you need, and there's something that doesn't feel right about that's what it takes. But let's go to another question.
Thank you. Here is another thought. We have talked about the problems on economic level. We also talked about the health issues. But at the same time, I also know that, or I seem to know that, especially the mountains in this land have a very strong spiritual value for your nation. And now these machines come in and they do all the digging and they desecrate, basically, sanctity. How do you feel about that invasion in spirituality?
One of the things I had written about in regards to, it's like a cancer that's deemed into Mother Earth. We dig so much into the earth itself that we have caused damage. We're not gaining this because we're digging uranium for our own benefits as Dene people. We're allowing somebody to go in there and just desecrate what we have. And so we're digging and digging, and finally it's just a cancerous sore, and we can't do anything with it. We've actually made the illness open to all our own people, our Dene people. So when we look at the four sacred mountains, obviously, that's something to keep us home base. That's just our sacred part of our well-being. But yet again, we have people who are going in there still digging around. Now they have left this cancerous sore, and all we can do is just sit there and watch it grow and then sicken our own people.
It's interesting what he says, because I watched in one of the programs I mentioned earlier, one native First American said, "This is my land and my land is me. I am physically the land." So when our questioner asks about how you feel when the land is contaminated, the feeling just seems immense when you put it in those terms. This is my land and my land is me.
It's basically what we are. We have Mother Earth is what sustains us. That's where our life comes from. And that's very important as Dene people. You'll see some of the ceremonies, or you see some of the rugs, or the spiritual things. When you see corn coming up, that's life to us. That's coming from the earth, bringing it up. But unfortunately now our water is contaminated so badly that our corn and our vegetation is coming up with fungus. It's not feeding our children. It's not feeding our homes. And it's not feeding our livestock. It's sickening them. So we have people who are getting very deathly sick from all this.
I was watching something online. There's a slideshow that really explains the contamination of water and land. And there was a Navajo woman who said that she doesn't feel anger or animosity toward the U.S. government. And I have to confess, I was blown away by that.
The elders are very respectful and they're very humbled. And so they know the things that have happened to us, but they forgive so easily. They're very hospitable people who just want to make sure that we have a natural balance. They always tell us to walk in beauty. That's part of our ceremonies, but they just don't, sometimes I don't think they understand the repercussions that it's doing to our future of Dene people.
I want to end, I guess, with what role you think those who have left the reservation must play in the survival of the culture today.
We have actually a greater responsibility. We try to straddle the fence, like you had said earlier. We have to live in a more native culture, but yet again, we have to look what the white man is thinking too. That's what I've always been taught. So you kind of straddle that line every once in a while. But we have a lot of things where we have to educate ourselves on issues. We have a lot of problems with Indian Child Welfare Act. We have a lot of issues regarding the environment. We have a lot of issues regarding gaming. There's other things that come up. We have our own political system. We have to be very steadfast in what our beliefs are and what's the best for our particular nations, because every nation is different.
And many people think that the gaming industry might be the salvation of the Navajo reservation. How do you view it?
I don't think so. We have too many gaming that's affecting a lot of different nations that I know of. And
negatively affecting.
Negatively affecting it. I think initially if we kind of curve our things into looking at developing with environmental technology, windmills and things of that make us more of a green power, as they would say. I think that's what we have to look at this point. We have the wind on the Navajo reservation, so we use it.
So how optimistic are you about the future?
I think we're going to be developing. We have a better structure. We have a good base as far as how we look at our government now. And if we need any more additional backing, hopefully we can look at what President Obama's tribal liaison team is looking at. And they're looking at more of things of how to empower our nations, not just looking at it as the impoverished nations of the United States. We're trying to get in there, and we're obviously educating more of our young people too. So.
All right, Sonya French-Begay, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to our studio audience, and to all of you watching. I'm Patty Satalia for WPSU, Penn State Public Broadcasting. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you. This has been a production of WPSU. A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.